I don't like to over-spiritualize narcissistic behavior, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. But I did come across this question from one of you on my YouTube channel. It says, Kevin, are narcissists fallen angels of the Nephilim? I've read the book of Enoch, which says that fallen angels are demons. Now, this question piqued my interest because what we're about to do is blend both the spiritual with some of the natural. And I promise you, this is going to be unlike anything that you have heard in Sunday school, folks. I promise you that. Buckle up, because we're going to connect narcissism with the Nephilim. My name is Kevin, and this is The Royal We. Now, before we dive into the strange and the mysterious connection of narcissism and the Nephilim, let me remind you that I'm here to support you. Down in the description box right below this video, you'll find access for one-on-one appointments with me. I do take telephone calls and video calls through Zoom, FaceTime, and WhatsApp. Also, The Royal We does have a private membership available for you where you can get daily live support from me with a growing community of people from all over the world. And by the way, we do have fellowship once a week. And it just so happens that we have come out a few weeks of looking at the book of Enoch. And so this is pretty fresh on my mind. It's a great opportunity to talk about this. You can download the Royal We membership app down below in the description box to join in on the weekly fellowship. And last but not least, the Royal We does have merchandise available for you. You can show your support for the Royal We by purchasing a t-shirt, a hoodie, a hat, or even a mug. And if you post a picture on your Instagram, like these amazing people right here, you will get a free one-on-one hour support call with me. All you have to do is tag me on Instagram at Join the Royal We, sporting your t-shirt, and I look forward to talking with you. Now, let's get into this very mysterious discussion about connecting the Nephilim out of the Bible, what the spiritual and the natural implications are, and how it could possibly connect to narcissism and narcissistic abuse. Now, as I mentioned before, I don't like to over-spiritualize narcissistic abuse. And the reason is because when you over-spiritualize narcissistic behavior, well, then you tend to over-spiritualize the solution for narcissistic behavior, which looks a lot like trying to pray the abuse away, or going to Christian counseling or support groups and trying to love on these narcissistic people with a Christ-like love. And how many of you have already gone this route for years only to come out empty-handed and even more damaged and hurt because you stayed in a toxic relationship with an abusive personality that you should have ran from a long time ago? So for that reason, I don't like to over-spiritualize it, because narcissistic abuse is not something that you can simply pray away. There's a natural component. There's a component about the person's nature that you're dealing with. It's not as simple as them just being full of demons that you can pray away. There's something inherent in their nature that makes them more violent, hostile, rageful, and these things are not necessarily just demonic or spiritual. It's a part of their nature. So to begin with, let's talk about the Nephilim. In the Hebrew Bible, the Nephilim were mighty men who were born to the daughters of humans and the sons of God. The Nephilim is often translated as giants. So where do we find this information? Well, this goes back to Genesis chapter 6. This is the time of the flood where Noah built the ark. You know, you learn about Noah's ark in Sunday school, but we don't really talk about, and most Christian churches don't really explore what was really taking place at that time. The world was so covered in sin and everything was so bad. And I mean bad. We're not just talking about jerks running around, yelling and screaming and cussing at each other. We're talking epic proportions of violence and nastiness and sin and defilement, so great that God had to start over. It's like, what in the world would cause that? I mean, we live in a world of narcissism. We live in a world today where there's plenty of killing, plenty of domestic violence, plenty of nastiness, but nothing that would require a complete start over, right? So something at this point in time, in Genesis 6, happened. And what we read right before the flood is that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful and wanted a part of that action and had children with the daughters of men. And these children became the mighty men of renown. And the Nephilim is also mentioned. Now, there's a lot of theological debate. What are the sons of God? The safe path that most non-denominational Christianity wants to go down is, well, the sons of God is referring to the descendants of Seth. And who is Seth? Some of you might be asking. Seth is the son of Adam and Eve, the righteous son. As the story goes, the first righteous son, Abel, was killed by his brother Cain in the story, right? Typical narcissist. That's what narcissists do. Narcissists attack and kill those that are righteous. How dare you be righteous? How dare you find favor? How dare you outshine me? How dare you outperform me? How dare you believe for God loves you more? I'm just going to kill you, right? Cain was a typical narcissist. So Abel was killed. Seth was the new son, the new righteous one. Seth is the son, the replacement of Abel. Cain ended up being a restless wanderer on the face of this earth, and his lineage is really no longer talked about after that point. It's from the line of Seth now that the generations go on to the point of Noah. And so a lot of theologians would claim that the sons of God are the sons of the lineage of Seth. But I have a problem with that, and you should too. Why would it make a distinction between the sons of God and the daughters of men if it was simply the sons of Seth? I mean, wouldn't the daughters also be daughters of Seth? Wouldn't they also be daughters of God? I mean, it kind of gets into that territory of almost being sexist, if that's really the way they look at it, like the sons of Seth. And, well, the daughters, we're just going to call them daughters of men. No, that doesn't make any sense. A more mystical explanation is that the sons of God, and this is important, follow along with me, are actually referring to angelic beings. Angelic beings, and they're not named in the book of Genesis, but they're named in endorsed biblical writings. We're going to get into that in just a moment. But the story is that these angelic beings saw that the daughters of men were beautiful and came down and had children with them. And a consequence of that rebellious coming together, the consequences was a mutated DNA. Suddenly, you had these half-breeds walking around the planet. Half-breeds meaning half angelic beings and half human. And now a lot of people and a lot of Christian scholars and theologians would say, Kevin, that's absolutely crazy. How could angels come down and have children with daughters of men? That makes no sense, Kevin. Well, it's not that difficult to really think about it. You just have to have a little bit of imagination and also a little bit of understanding here, even scriptural understanding. You really only need three things. The angels would have to have three requirements in order to have children with daughters of men. Number one, they would have to have the ability to take on human form. Well, I'm not going to go through all of the scriptures here that do enforce and share examples of angels taking on human form. Whether you want to look at the angel who talked with Mary at Jesus' tomb, which was in human form, or you want to talk about the angels who rescued Lot and his wife out of Sodom and Gomorrah, once again, in human form. So the Bible gives plenty evidence that angelic beings can in fact take human form. So there's one, check. The next thing is that the angels then would have to have their own free will. Well, once again, there's plenty of support throughout all of the Bible that angelic beings also have free will, which means they have the will to go against God's instructions, whether it's the devil, who at one time was an angel, one of the most glorified angels in all of heaven, but rebelled due to his own free will, and as a consequence was cast down to the earth. So there's plenty of biblical support to let us know that angels also have free will. The third one would be that the angels would then need to be able to rebel. Well, given that they have free will, it's absolutely safe to say that, yes, angels can then rebel. And we see that time and time again throughout the scriptures. The devil rebelled against God, did exactly the opposite of what God had instructed or created the devil to do. So there you go. There's the three key ingredients. You have angels that can take on human form, which is supported throughout the Bible. You have angels exercising their free will, again, supported throughout the Bible. And you have angels who are rebellious, again, supported throughout the entire Bible. So when you put these things together, now, is it possible for angelic beings to have children with the daughters of men? Yeah. It's not that difficult to say, okay, yeah, it absolutely could happen. Most non-denominational Christianity, Western world Christianity, doesn't like to go there for obvious reasons, right? It gets weird and they don't like it. It's not safe for them and they possibly think it could distract from the message of the gospel, whatever the case may be. But you and I need to have this understanding. Now, in the book of Genesis 6, it doesn't really tell us any more detail other than the sons of God had children. Sin was all over the world. It was an absolute horror, disaster, mess of epic proportions, so much so that God had to destroy everything and start over. But thankfully, as I said, there is extra biblical text that endorsed biblical text, by the way, such as the writings of Enoch, that gives us a better understanding of what happened. Now, the book of Enoch is not canon to Western world Christianity, and it's obvious because it's a weird book. I believe that whoever came together, the council of people who put the Western world Christian book together, said, we're going to leave the book of Enoch out because we don't want to answer any questions about what's going on in there. We lack the imagination to do so. So we're going to leave that out. But I would like to say that there are regions in the world that do have the book of Enoch as canon in the Bible. Not only that, but Enoch is mentioned in the New Testament of the Bible. So we know that it is biblically endorsed. Whether or not it's canon in Western world Christianity or not, it is a biblically endorsed writing. All right. What the book of Enoch does tell us is, in fact, what we just mentioned, or what I just mentioned. The sons of God are watchers. They're an angelic group. They're a rank, if you will, which gets us into the territory of angels being in ranks. You have cherubim, you have the watchers, you have your archangels, right? God has ranks of angels that do different tasks. The watchers were tasked with watching over humanity, according to the book of Enoch. And in the book of Enoch, it's the watchers who came together and said, let's go down and partake in some of what they're doing. And they came into an agreement with each other, exercising their free will, knowing that they were rebelling against God's instructions, and had children with the daughters of men. And the children with the daughters of men that they had happened to be giants, the mighty men of renown. They're also called the Nephilim. So what took place was a mutation of DNA. What took place was a natural twisting, a branching out, a deviation of what God had created humans to be, from Adam and Eve and from Seth and the line of humanity. Now, these angels who went against and rebelled against God came down and injected this different DNA, creating this mutation, a complete deviation, and created this really nasty, disgusting mutation, if you will, of humanity. Now we can understand why it was so bad. And keep in mind that this happened over generations. It wasn't like a one-night stand that the watchers had these children and then bounced. There's no telling really what the timeline looks like, but it's safe to assume that the whole world, at least the region, was repopulated with these half-breeds, half angelic beings, half human beings. And it's at this point, and in the book of Enoch, it gets a lot worse. It talks about how these giants started to eat the people because they couldn't sustain themselves with the food on the planet. All kinds of horrible things were happening. You're really going to have to read the book of Enoch for yourself to understand just how bad it got. And when you read it, it's going to make sense as to why God said, I'm going to flood this place because this is bad. This is really bad. Again, we're not just talking about people being mean and jerks to each other. We're talking about a complete annihilation of what God had designed for humanity. And so God takes Noah, and then we get into the flood and the ark and Noah, and now we understand this from basic Bible school. Noah and his wife and his sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, they all get on the boat with all the animals, 2 of every kind. And this is important to understand. One of the things that we don't understand about God, but you'll understand it if you look at the Old Testament, is God's very specific. God is very disciplined. God is very orderly. God is very keen on kind. There is this kind, there is that kind. There's male, there is female. God is very strict on that. And we can see that illustrated when God says, I'm going to take 2 of every kind, male and female of every animal, right? God's desire was to start over with 2 of every kind, very orderly, back in the boat. Noah. And by the way, why was Noah chosen? I've oftentimes thought about this. And now many theologians would argue, well, perhaps Noah was more prayerful or more upright or whatever. I wouldn't say that was it. If I were to give my opinion, the reason Noah was selected is because probably by that time, Noah was one of the few that was just pure bred, probably the only one that was pure human by that time, meaning his DNA, his blood was not tainted by the Nephilim, by the Watchers. Again, it wasn't just a one-night stand. There was generations of Nephilim being populated. Okay, the time's not specified. All we know is that God said, Noah, you get on the boat. Probably because Noah and his wife were of pure genealogy from the line of Seth. But we have a problem. Because as the story goes, Noah, his wife, and his sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, they get on board the boat with their wives. The flood takes place. The whole world is annihilated. All the creatures, all the creepy crawly things, all the Nephilim, everything is supposedly destroyed. All right. And by the way, I do want to take a side road with you real quick, because the book of Enoch also helps us to understand what demons are. Demons, according to the book of Enoch, this is fascinating. Are you ready? Demons, because most people don't have an understanding. What are demons? Are they angels? Are they fallen angels? What are they? Here's what the book of Enoch has to tell us. The book of Enoch says that the demons that you and I wrestle with are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim. So the children that are half-bred between the angels and the humans, they're basically bastardized children. They're illegitimate children. They were not designed by God. They were not designed to be here on this earth. And so part of the consequence that God had put onto both the Watchers and the Nephilim is that the Nephilim had no place in heaven when they died. Their disembodied spirits would be wandering the face of this earth, and they would be called demons. And they would torment humans. And the reason they torment humans is out of envy and out of jealousy, because they hate the fact that they are part human, but also part angel, angelic being, but they have no place in heaven because they were not created by God. They were not designed by God. And so they have no part in heaven. So this is the first generation of Nephilim, meaning the literal sons and daughters of the angels and the women. The first generation crossbreeds, if you will. All right. The book of Enoch says that those are the demons that we wrestle with. Fascinating, right? Anyway, so after the flood, the boat lands and life starts over. And so when life starts over, we have Noah, his wife, and we have his sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. And so it's safe to say that all of us, you, me, I know that many people are like, we come from Abraham. Well, listen, before we come from Abraham, we come from one of the lines of Ham, Japheth, or Shem. Okay? Now, this is where it gets very fascinating. There's a story where after the boat had landed, that Noah got drunk and he passed out drunk in his tent. And his son Ham was the first that noticed. Now, it doesn't say that Ham sat and stared at him. Ham just noticed that his father was passed out drunk. Ham then got his brothers, Japheth and Shem, and said, hey, Dad's passed out drunk. What should we do? And they all walked backwards and they covered him. Okay? This is an important part of this story. I promise you. Okay? It's going to get weird here. It's important to understand this because they all walked backwards. They covered their father, Noah, who was drunk. But as a consequence, what happened was the father woke up, Noah woke up, and he began cursing Canaan. It's like, whoa, Canaan? Well, who's Canaan, by the way? Canaan is one of the sons of Ham. Canaan wasn't even there. Canaan had no part in covering Noah's nakedness. All right? And a lot of theology would say that, well, the reason Noah cursed Canaan is because it's a sin to look on someone's naked body. And I think that it's stupid theology to me. And I'll tell you why. Many of you who are fathers or mothers, if your child notices you're naked, not sitting there staring at you in some weird, awkward, creepy way, but notices it, goes and gets the other siblings, and they walk backwards with all due respect and try to cover you in your moment of vulnerability, wouldn't you be thankful? Absolutely. I know I would. But as modern Western world theology has it, Noah was so outraged that they tried to cover him and his vulnerability that he cursed Canaan, one of the grandsons, who wasn't even a part of it. This is where I think, again, it's kind of stupid theology. I have a different understanding and a different theology to present. This is the theology of my research, so take it with a grain of salt. But here's what I would say. Are you interested to know? Here's what I would say. I believe that Noah, after they got off the boat, and his sons, Shem, it's hard to say these names, right? Shem, Ham, and Japheth, they started having kids with their wives. And by the way, we don't know anything about the wives they brought on board the boat. It doesn't even mention them. Again, keep in mind, they came out of an era that was dominated by Nephilim, to the point to where God had to eradicate and destroy everyone except for Noah and his family and the wives who we know nothing about. So here's what I would suggest to you. I believe that Noah witnessed something. Witnessed a lot. He came out of an era where there was giants and Nephilim. So he saw some shit, right? Excuse my language. He saw some crazy stuff and he thought it was over. He thought that God eradicated it all and it was done. But I believe this is what happened. Noah recognized that Ham's son Canaan was not like the other kids, if you know what I mean. I believe that this is probably what even caused Noah to start drinking to begin with. As his sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, were having children, Noah was like, whoa, dude, Canaan, chill. You're not like the others. What I believe Noah witnessed was the presence of that DNA, that mutated DNA from the Nephilim, which means that, yes, that DNA had gotten onto the boat, possibly through one of the wives of Shem, Ham, Japheth, definitely Ham's wife, for sure. We know this because I believe that Canaan, and there's biblical support for this, I'm going to get there in just a moment, Canaan was not like the other grandchildren. Canaan definitely presented himself as being different. And I believe that Noah had to deliver this message to a grandson and to a son that he loved. Imagine if it's your children and they have children and you're looking at one of the grandkids going, whoa, you're not human. What's up with you, dude? I thought God eradicated this. And now here it is. I can already tell Canaan, right here. Canaan, you're not just an average kid, are you? I mean, that would make me drink too, especially if you believed that God eradicated all of it. So he's presented with Canaan possibly being having a dominant display of characteristics of the Nephilim, something that Noah thought God had gotten rid of. Now, why would I say this, by the way? And I believe this is why Noah was drinking. This is why he was drunk, because he had to say this message. He had to say, cursed is Canaan. Canaan's not human. Canaan's not like the rest of us. Canaan is what God tried to eradicate, and here it is again. And this is probably why he drank, because he had to give this message. Here's the support that I offer you. And I promise you, again, it's super important for us to all understand this, because the Bible then goes on to tell us that after Noah does, in fact, curse Canaan, which doesn't make any sense, right? Why would he curse Canaan, who wasn't even there, didn't even witness Noah being naked? Here's what we discover about Canaan. Canaan then started having kids. And as proof and evidence that in Canaan's DNA was strong, dominant genetics of the Nephilim and the giants, well, we get into scriptures. It says here that, I'm going to read some of this. Through the line of Canaan, we get into all kinds of Old Testament giants after the flood. All right. Now, we get into Genesis 14, talks about Rephaim, Zuzim, Emin, or Amorites. All these different labels that were supposedly discussed as being giants in the Old Testament. Beginning with the Amorites are mentioned more than 80 times in scriptures. And early on, some were allied with Abraham. Okay, so later on in the story of Abraham in Genesis 14, we see that the Amorites, some of them were allied with Abraham, and they were descendants of Noah's grandson, Canaan. So from Canaan's line, you get the Amorites. Now, although the Bible does not provide this information, the Jewish general turned historian Josephus gives the name of their ancestors as Amorites. While the Amorites are mentioned in the same context as other giants a few times, they are specifically described as giants in the minor prophets. So we get into this territory of the Amorites as being giants. In the book of Amos, it says this, "Yet it was I who destroyed the Amorite before them, whose height was like the height of cedars." So just to put it in perspective, this dominant trait, the characteristic, the genetic coding, if you will, of these particular Amorites, or these giants, one of the signs of it was extreme height. And we're not just talking about your 6'4" dude, right? Many of you probably know somebody who's 6'4", 6'3". Yeah, that's pretty tall. These people were as tall as cedar trees. And some of you might be saying, "Oh, Kevin, that's just the Bible being it's exaggerating." Oh, really? Well, listen, if you're going to believe the Bible, then believe the Bible, right? If it says, these people are saying these people are the size of cedar trees, then chances are they were the size of cedar trees, right? The Amorites before them, whose height, this is out of Amos, right? Book of Amos 2, 9 through 10. The Amorites before them, whose height was like the height of cedars, and he was as strong as the oaks, yet I destroyed his fruit above and the roots beneath. Also, it was I who brought you up from the land of Egypt and led you 40 years through the wilderness to possess the land of the Amorite. This is God speaking as he was leading people in dealing with giants through the Amorites, again, from the line of Canaan. Canaan, the grandson of Noah. So you can see how it's possible that Noah noticed something off about Canaan. Canaan's not like one of us. Canaan is not supposed to be here. The Nephilim was supposed to be destroyed, but it's not. The DNA survived, and it's here, and now we're going to have to face these giants again. The DNA of the angels and the women having children. It created this deviant genetic coding that is still in existence after the flood. Through Amos, God clearly stated that the Amorites were generally very tall and strong. Some may downplay the description of the Amorites, typically modern Western world Christianity, in this passage, since these verses employ figurative language, but there are some good reasons to take this passage in a straightforward manner. Yes, a lot of non-denominational Western world Christianity likes to downplay, like I said, the height and these giants. Oh, it's just descriptive, and they weren't really that big. Right. But there's some things in the Bible in the Old Testament that we're going to get into that really help us understand, no, they were actually really big. I mean, Goliath was big. I mean, if you think about it, even 12, 13, 14 feet tall, 15, listen, I'm 6'1", two of me standing on top of me, that's giant, that's huge. And they're not just tall and lanky, they're big, they're massive, they're beasts of people, okay? The idea that the Amorites were giants is supported by the report of the spies, by the way, and other scriptures to support the giant size of these things, this DNA mutation throughout the old literature of the Bible. It's important to understand. I want you to understand the DNA mutation, the consequence of the sons of God and the daughters of men having children. This is the consequence of that. It's a complete gene splicing. It's a branching of what God designed for humanity. It's a complete deviation. It's a mutation, okay? It says this, that the spies whom Moses sent through the land of Canaan, the Amorites were one of the people groups they saw in the book of Numbers 13:29, and they claimed that all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. Numbers 13:32, it is telling that in their response, Joshua and Caleb did not challenge the size of the land's inhabitants. Joshua and Caleb went and checked these people out in the book of Numbers. And they're like, dude, we're not messing with those guys. Those guys are giants. We stand no chance. All right. So now we get other names throughout the Bible that we're going to talk about, not just Nephilim. We have the Amorites, which were also giants. Another way they're described is Emim. Everyone say Emim. In the book of Deuteronomy 2, it reveals that the Emim, which likely means terrors in the ancient Hebrew text, terrors were most likely giants. Why else would they be terrors? All right, sure, some people, modern Western world Christianity might argue, well, they're terrors because they're just meanies. They're jerks. They're assholes. That's what makes them terrors. I don't think people are really terrified by meanies. I know I'm not. I've come across meanies and jerks. They're not terrors. When you think of a terror, what do you think of? You think of something that you are helpless against, right? So most likely these terrors, or the Emim, as described in Deuteronomy 2, were also giants. It says this in Deuteronomy 2:10 through 11, the Emim had dwelt there in times past, a people as great and numerous and tall as the Anakim. They were also regarded as giants in the Hebrew word Raphaim, like the Anakim, but the Moabites called them Emim. So Emim was another group's way of discussing and talking about these giants in the book of Deuteronomy. Moses told the people that the Emim used to live in the territory that God had given the descendants of Lot's son Moab. So even Moses acknowledged the Emim, these terrors, these terrible sights, this genetic mutation that's not human, okay? Another way they were described is the Zuzim, or Zamzumim. The Zamzumim, almost certainly the same as Zuzim in Genesis 14:5, were also called giants and listed in the same chapter as the Emim. It says here, the land of Ammon was also regarded as the land of giants. Hebrew, Raphaim. Raphaim was a way to describe the giants. It was the Hebrew word for giants. Formerly dwelt there, but the Ammonites called them Zamzumim, a people as great and numerous and as tall as the Anakim, but the Lord destroyed them before them, and they dispossessed them and dwelt in their place. Deuteronomy 2:20 through 21. So that verse describes and explains that a group of giants known as the Zamzumim had lived in the land of Ammon a land of giants. There's that word again, giants. This is all post-flood, folks. Giants still existed. The Nephilim DNA continued. This is the point. In the nature, the Nephilim DNA had become woven during the time pre-flood. That branching, that splitting, that enmeshment of the DNA, what God created as human beings and what the angels came down and did, created this branch and this split, a brand new type of being, a brand new DNA, all right, that was never meant to be. And it's important that we understand this. A land of giants, God destroyed the Zamzummim, so that the descendants of Lot's son Ben-Ami and the Ammonites could live in the land where they were. Now, I want to mention this too. A lot of people look at the God of the Old Testament as being a warmonger. Why is the Old Testament so full of killing, and why is God leading people to kill people and this and that? Listen, if we're taking all this into consideration, it wasn't like race wars. It wasn't about race. It wasn't even about faith. It wasn't about religion. It wasn't any of that stuff. If you want my personal theology of what was taking place, it's a seed war. That's exactly what it is. It's ever since God flooded the world, and following the post-flood, it's God's desire to eradicate the dominant traits and the dominant DNA strands still in existence of the Nephilim. The children, the crossbreeds, those that were never supposed to exist in the first place. Because that is a bastardized version of humanity. It was a twisted mutation of DNA that was never supposed to take place. So it's a seed war. That God was sending people to go and eradicate what the flood didn't completely annihilate. The remnants of the Nephilim is what God had taken his people to annihilate and destroy, because they were never supposed to be here to begin with. They had no place. Now I can go on and on and on about the Raphaim, the Zuzim. We can even go on as far as when King David, later in the Bible, took on Goliath. Goliath was what? Everybody say it together. That's right, a giant. And what are these giants? What are these giants? Whether we call them Raphaim, Nephilim, Zuzim, Zuzim, Amorites, right? What are these things? They are entities with the dominant traits of the genetic coding, or the genes, if you will, of the Watchers and the Daughters of Men, the half-breeds. This is what God was trying to eliminate from the world. Now, many people might say, but why then? Why would God want to eliminate them? Let me think about this for a moment. You have humanity, which God designed to be human, through Adam and Eve and Seth and Noah and on and on. And then you have these crossbreeds, this DNA that's not just human, it's half angelic and half human. Well, these things, these entities, these giants would obviously demand and command worship. As a matter of fact, that's probably why God had to flood the world, is because not only, according to the book of Enoch, were they eating people, for crying out loud, talk about terrors, right? But they're probably demanding worship. They're probably saying, we are your God. Look at our size. Look at our abilities. Look at our strength. We can eat you, little human. Bow down and worship me. So it's no wonder God would take a stance and say, oh yeah? Really? Oh, you're going to make yourselves out to be gods, you crossbred, bastardized children, because you are the sons of half angels and half humans. Well, first I'm going to flood and annihilate you. And then not only am I going to do that, but then I'm going to take my people as I've created them, humanity, and I'm going to use them to destroy whatever's left of you. You will not be gods on this planet. Now, again, this gets into the territory of what I was saying. The wars of the Old Testament are seed wars. Not race wars, not religious wars. They're seed wars to rid the world of the Nephilim, the giants. Now, this is where it gets interesting. If this is true, what I'm telling you, and again, take this with a grain of salt. This is my theology. Like I said, modern Westworld Christianity is not going to like this, and for obvious reasons, they don't want to talk about these things. They don't really want to answer these questions because it's mystical. It sounds kind of crazy. But listen, there's a lot of even historical evidence that suggests a lot of strange things. I mean, just look at ancient Egypt and the pyramids. Look at the drawings that they had on the walls with giant people and even people with the head of a human and the body of an animal. I don't think they were just creatively coming up with these things. I believe that they have at some point witnessed or read writings about these things. And by the way, on the topic of people's faces on animal bodies, it's important to also understand that in the book of Enoch, it says that not only did the Watchers, the sons of God, have children with the daughters of men, but once they realized that they can splice and alter God's DNA, well, it does indicate that they sinned against the animals too. Now, I'm not saying it means they did freaky, nasty things with animals, but it's probably evident if they sinned against the beasts of the world, it probably means that they did figure out ways to splice and mutate and maybe have children with animals. And perhaps it's not that far-fetched to use your imagination to see that perhaps there were animals that were half human. After all, if these Watchers can create half-bred people with women, then they probably said, hey, well, we can probably create half-breeds with animals too. And so now we got, anyways, that's a side note. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. All we do know is that whatever was taking place before the flood was so disgusting to God that he flooded the entire world. So you take that and you come up in your imagination what would make things so disgusting that God would flood the world, right? I'm going to put that out there, that there was half-bred humans, half-bred animals. The Watchers, the sons of God, really made a mess of everything that created long-lasting consequences through Noah's son Ham, even Canaan, which disturbed Noah to the point of becoming drunk and then having to face his grandkids and his son Ham, saying, "Cursed is Canaan." I thought God got rid of these, but nope, they're here. They're continuing on. And so the rest of the ancient literature of the Bible is a seed war of God trying to eradicate the Nephilim. That's the point of this. But there's one more point that I would like to make. If all of this is true, and even us today in this world, we all come from the line of either, yes, we come from Adam and then through Seth, as we've discussed, but then we also come from either the line of Japheth, Shem, or Ham. And if we come from the line of Ham specifically and through Canaan, that means that there is most likely that DNA, although the Bible makes it perfectly clear that God went after and sought after the dominant DNA characteristics of the Nephilim. So the obvious giants, those who carried the dominant traits of the Nephilim, were eradicated. Whether it was David killing Goliath or God destroying and wiping out the Amorites, before people so they can take over the land. The effort was to get rid of those who had the dominant traits of the Nephilim. That's not to say that the DNA has been completely wiped out, because as many of you know, just because you don't have the dominant traits of something doesn't mean it's not within you. For example, I have blue eyes. I know you can't tell, but it's strange because my dad has brown eyes, my mom has brown eyes. So where did I get blue eyes from? Well, somewhere in my lineage, my great-great-great-grandparents had blue eyes. My brother has brown eyes, right? So I have this DNA characteristic, this trait that gives me bluer eyes than even my dad or my mom. So we have to understand how DNA works. You don't have to carry a dominant trait of something to still have it within you. And so you're not going to like, but you might like what I'm about to tell you, that it's quite possible that the DNA of the Nephilim still exists, even today. Not as dominant, Because again, the seed wars, God, throughout the Old Testament of the Bible, where many people think God's a warmonger, he eradicated what was never supposed to be. Again, the bastardized mutation of something that's not even human. That is what God was at war with through people, all right, through his people. That being said, there's still the DNA. It's still out there in small amounts, less dominant amounts, but still there. And so now, here's the question. Is it possible that the Nephilim DNA is still alive and active today? Absolutely. Is it possible that some of this DNA can be expressed through narcissism? And even though they're not the size of cedar trees anymore, even though they're not giants, could it possibly be what's behind some of the aggression, some of the behaviors, such as the hatred towards humanity? And most narcissistically abusive people that you've dealt with, they hate people, don't they? They especially hate those who are righteous. They especially hate those who do good. Is it possible that while many of them might be only 5'5", I've dealt with some narcissistic people who absolutely hate other humans, but they're only like 5'1". They're like little people, right? So they're not dominant in their stature because God had eradicated all that, but there's still enough DNA of the Nephilim to have a dominant behavioral attribute of meanness and of cruelty. It's very possible. It's very possible that you, if the scripture is true, it's possible that you have some DNA of Nephilim. It's possible that I have some DNA of Nephilim. It's possible. Because again, it had woven itself according to the ancient literature of the Bible, according to the book of Enoch. It's there. It's present in this world. Now again, this is getting way outside the box, and I know I'm thinking outside the box here, but it's going to help you to understand perhaps what Jesus really came to do, which obviously is to save humanity. But if you look at what Jesus preached, what did he say? He said, you must be born again. What is this referring to? Perhaps part of what Jesus is referring to is there is now a way, once Jesus is here, to even if you are born into sin, meaning you have this DNA of the Nephilim, this thing that was never supposed to exist, being born again is symbolic and a washing away of that DNA. It's a spiritual work that eliminates and suppresses that DNA of the Nephilim. It's just food for thought. Then again, I could be completely wrong about this, but make no mistake about it, I believe that while I don't over-spiritualize narcissistic abuse as being demons and evil spirits that you can just pray out, I would say, and I've always believed, that part of narcissistic abuse is their nature. They have a violent nature, a hostile nature. Some of this may in fact be attributed to DNA. DNA of what? According to this message that I'm delivering, perhaps the Nephilim. But even if we do have little bits of Nephilim, I believe the story and the power of what Jesus provides and being born again is a washing away of that, a suppression of that DNA to bring forth and live out in our life in something, in a way that separates us from that DNA, perhaps any behaviors. Now this gets into the territory of, well then Kevin, then can narcissistic people be changed? I don't know. It depends on how much of the Nephilim is in that DNA. How much of their nature are they going against? From what I've seen, narcissistic people who are violent, hostile, aggressive, they never truly change. They may learn to suppress it, but it's always within them. Sometimes the DNA, it's always there. Again, narcissistic abuse is not just spiritual. There's a natural component. Most Western world churches today are filled with psychopaths, sociopaths, cluster Bs, borderlines. And by the way, all these are just labels to understand the different natures of people. What's in their DNA? What is in the DNA of a person that drives their nature? This has been an interesting discussion. Let me know if you agree, if you find this absolutely silly, or if you find it interesting. Either way, I would love to hear from you down in the comment section down below. And by the way, I do have fellowship as a part of the Royal We private membership. You can download the membership app down below in the description box. I hope you found this video helpful. If you are brand new to the Royal We, be sure to hit the subscribe button right now. Like this video, share it with somebody who needs to watch it. Check out one of these videos recommended by the YouTube algorithm, and I'll be back with more right here on the Royal We.